want to preface tonight by saying again, you will find all kinds of different interpretations to what we're studying here. I don't think there's one single person that knows exactly the way this is going to play out on the end times. But as I was studying some of these things, I kind of went back to one of my old sources which has a lot of different scholars. And I was studying through some of these verses and I'm thinking, oh man, they were things all over the place. Okay, all kinds of different interpretations, and so I want you to be aware that what I'm going to teach you is basically the way MacArthur tells it and the way Barnhouse tells it. You're going to be able to find different interpretations that are far different. Some of them are very far different. Some of them are a little different. Some of them are similar. But I just want to tell you, I don't know all the answers. Okay? And I don't think these guys know all the answers. They think they have their interpretation of what they understand, but overall, I don't think anyone is really sure how this plays out. Okay. So we ended there with the first 5 verses of chapter 20, talking about the first resurrection. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were completed. This is the first resurrection. Now we talked about that, what that first resurrection mean, and how that what's the interpretation of that. That means that's a multi-phase event. Okay, but what he's talking about there in verse 5, the rest of the dead, that's all the unbelieving dead. And that resurrection that he's talking about is the resurrection to the great white throne judgment, which we're going to read about here in a minute. Okay? So he ends with, blessed and holy is the one who has a part in the first resurrection. Over these, the second death has no power. Now there he's talking about those born again believers. Over those, the second death has no power, but they will be priests of God and of Christ and will reign with him for 1,000 years. Now, when we read that, you have to interpret that in a very specific way. I think it's very literal that we will reign with him. What does that mean to you when it says we will reign with him?
Exactly that.
What it says.
Well, if you take it literally, that you'll be there with him and helping to reign over whoever.
So the question then begs, okay, we're going to reign with him. What is he reigning? What are we reigning over?
The people that are left on earth.
The people that are left on earth. Now we talked about that. There has to be people left on earth. Okay? The saints come back with Jesus. They have this final battle of Armageddon that we've talked about. There will be another battle that we're going to see here in a minute. So, and that army is destroyed, but there are still people have to be living on the earth. Now, why do I say they have to be?
Because otherwise we wouldn't have nobody else to reign over.
Who would we reign over?
Yeah.
We're going to reign over each other?
And
Not typically.
also, why locking away for 1,000 years, just, specifically talk about it, if there
Right.
wasn't someone to lock him away from.
Right, exactly. Okay, so let's pick up the verse 7. When the 1,000 years are completed, Satan will be released from his prison and will come out to deceive the nations which are in the 4 corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together for the war. The number of them is like the sand of the seashore. And they came up on the broad plain of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city. And fire came down from heaven and devoured them. And the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are also already. And they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. Now we read that, it seems very clear, right? And it's amazing to me that there have been some theologians who will take that last sentence and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever, and somehow they've construed that into something that doesn't mean forever and ever. I don't know how they do that, but that's just the kind of stuff you can get into when you look to different and research different theologians and what's their thoughts on those things. That forever and ever doesn't mean forever and ever. It means something defined So, the 1,000 years of reign are in process here. Christ is ruling from his holy city, Jerusalem. There are some that think Christ is not ruling from Jerusalem, but is still ruling from heaven, and that he's appointed some saints and special saints to rule in Jerusalem. I don't know the answer to that. It seems to me Christ would be ruling, because he said he would come back to the city of David, to Jerusalem. It will be reconfigured, geographically reconfigured, when he returns, and he will sit on his David's throne, which he has been given from eons past. But anyway, so this 1,000-year reign's going on now. So, okay. So these people that are left on the earth, we have to keep in mind, who are they? Who were these people that have been left on the earth when this 1,000-year reign begins?
The ones not taken in by Christ.
They're unbelievers. We have to assume, based on everything we know, because, the good news doesn't cause Satan to be locked up. God does.
Are they unbelievers that haven't taken the mark? Did I remember reading something like that?
Well, who haven't taken the mark of the beast.
Yeah. You could still be an unbeliever and not take the mark, I suppose.
Well, you could be, but it's probably pretty unlikely, because you would probably starve to death, or they probably would kill you if you didn't take it. Because you would have to, my guess is you would have to have some kind of allegiance. You have to take the mark of the forehead, or you mark in your hand, and worship the beast, or else.
Right.
Or else.
So they had the mark?
We're gonna assume, for the sake of argument, they did. That's one of the questions, that's one of the mysteries that we really don't know. This area is really, it's really difficult to get your head around and completely understand and completely know. Not that we can't understand what we're reading, but to know exactly the way these events play out. Specifically, these people that we're talking about. Who are they? They're, for what we've studied, the martyred saints have already been taken during the tribulation time. The righteousness of God dwindles away, the righteousness of man, which is not the righteousness of God, but goodness, moral upbringing, moral character, any kind of inspiration that the Bible would bring about, all that is just kind of disappeared. There's no goodness left, basically. So the saints are all gone. So after this final battle, these people are left, 1,000 years come into play. What we're looking at here, Satan will be released from prison. Okay, so, and we talked about what that was when Satan was released from prison.
Hold on 1 second. So we were talking about the mark of the beast. Will there continue to be babies born?
Yes.
So they will not have.
Life will go on. Remember, I read you some verses out of Isaiah. Longer life, no mortality rate for infants. There's going to be a time of peace and prosperity. People will live longer. And it seems to me, now, this is one of those gray areas that really doesn't paint us a clear picture. That life is going to go on like we know it today.
But it will be improved, like you said, though,
There's
during the
gonna
1,000 years, it's
There's
actually
gonna be peace
Yeah,
and,
prosperity.
I don't know about the prosperity
Okay.
part, but there's gonna be peace.
Mhm.
And people will probably live and have babies and marry and work and all those kind of things. But the saints of Christ are going to reign with him and rule the nations. Now, one guy went so far as to say, well, and how's that gonna be? Now, keep in mind, what are the saints and what are they like? What will we be like during this 1,000-year period? The saints.
We'll have glorified bodies.
Yeah,
We will have glorified bodies. What does that mean?
We won't
Have a-
age, we won't disease, we won't decay.
Some guys gone to the length of thinking that if we're gonna be similar to what Jesus' body was and what Jesus was. Jesus knew things that were going to happen. He passed through doors. In an instant, he was there. The next instant, he was gone. That we would be on the same scale as that. And that when somebody that we're reigning over, whatever that means, however,
But doesn't it say when he comes back, he rules with a rod of iron?
yes. That's kind of where I'm going. When we reign with him, that when somebody has a bad thought, we're right there and say, hey, you cannot think that, don't say that, don't do that, whatever that case is.
So you're saying we're on this planet with,
Oh, yeah, we will reign with Christ on earth.
For 1,000 years.
For
And then
1,000
there's the
years.
new earth and the new.
Not yet.
Right, after.
So we will think still bad thoughts and all that?
They will, we won't.
No, we won't, we'll be able to,
Oh, okay.
one theologian goes so far as to say,
They will be able
we'd
to-
be able to foresee those bad thoughts as they're happening to correct. I don't know the answer, I don't know if that's true or not, we don't know.
But you said the people that are here on earth during 1,000 years are unbelievers.
They are,
They start out with,
but
So
every knee will bow, every tongue confess. Christ is reigning and ruling, and he will judge the nations with a rod of iron. Remember I told you what that meant. That doesn't mean everybody in the world is gonna gather around Jerusalem and Jesus is going to judge them. That means representatives. He's gonna judge based on how they treated his people during the tribulation period, is the thought there. So these
the
people,
people that have been raptured are gonna be here too.
yeah, all the saints, all the raptured saints, you're gonna have your glorified body, you're gonna come back and he's, and keeping in mind here, once we have glorified bodies, you are neither given in marriage nor will you marry. You are not married, you will not be married, you won't even wanna be married. Okay? Not saying you won't know your husband, I think you very well might know who he is, but it'll be a whole different
Yeah, it won't be
relationship
an
that we have.
Well, what are our bodies, like a physical body, or will it be more of a spiritual?
If we have a body like Jesus,
Will it be more of a spiritual?
it'll be
Yeah.
a body,
So,
no,
he
it'll
had
be a
a
body.
body.
he ate,
Thomas touched
and he
him.
drank,
Yeah.
he had the scars, he had a physical appearing body, but he was certainly different. Okay? So yeah, all the people left on earth are unbelievers. And how do we know that? We know that because, and the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire. After 1,000 years, there's peace, and I don't know about prosperity, but there's peace on the earth. People having babies, there's babies, no babies die, no babies are aborted.
And they will come to know Jesus Christ.
No, they will not. They will not come to know Jesus Christ.
We don't we have glorified bodies?
We do,
We do.
when we're reigning with him. But the people left here on the earth that we're going to rule and reign over do not. They're still people. It has to be that
Okay,
way
so like if
because
they still have babies and stuff and it continues on, can those people be saved?
that's the question I don't know. I don't know the answer to
I
that.
mean, what would our purpose then be to rule over them you know what I mean?
If there's no hope for
If
them
there's no
now.
Well,
eternal
Keep
value of
keep
it.
in mind this, where did them people come from? The people that left here, where did they come from?
No,
They
survived the
already had
tribute.
opportunity.
Yes,
God's done with the people of the earth, okay? Okay, that's it. The terrible day of the Lord has come. I've had it, the time to end this has happened, okay? Now, what I don't know, which is a good question, and I can't answer it, and I don't think anybody can, what happens to those people, those kids that are born during that 1,000
Right.
years? Will they be able to give their life to Christ? I don't know the answer to that.
So
Nowhere in here does it tell you that.
I guess I don't understand what our purpose would be to rule over, reign over nobody's saved and they're all,
That's a
what's
good-
our
that's a-
purpose
That's
for
a
it?
good point, that's a good point.
You know what I'm saying? I
Yeah.
could see if we were trying to win them to Christ, but
Yeah.
if they're not,
And I've tried to find an answer to that, and I can't.
Well, I think it, just my mind, and it's just thought, would be that it would be like the, 40 years that they wandered in the wilderness until all of the adults that had done all sinful stuff was gone, and all that was left was the kids, you know,
Yeah, they all died in the wilderness.
yeah.
They all
So,
perished.
I mean, even though the ones that are here during 1,000 years won't perish, they won't have another chance to accept that the kids, children,
So that,
Might not.
it's a good question, what happens to those and do they have an opportunity? And I don't have an answer because I can't find it in scripture, I can't find any theologian that actually tells us what happens to those people. So I don't know, I don't have an answer for you.
I had another question that you can't answer because I've already looked and I can't find it. The kids that are born during the tribulation, the ones that are born after the rapture, during the tribulation, children that are born, will they be automatically tattooed, branded, whatever it is, with the mark of the beast?
That's,
Parents allow it.
Parents will be deceived into the point believing that it's a
would
good
it even be
thing.
necessary for kids to be that happened to at that time? I mean,
do what?
would it even be necessary for the kids to have to take the mark because they're really under their parents' ruling and it's not like the kids are, you know what I mean?
The government that we have then
Well,
will want
Yeah,
to, I mean,
that would be leverage
we,
that they
we are
would have
having,
on them.
we are having sympathy for a hard-hearted rebellious people,
yeah,
Yeah, that's true.
who God has given every opportunity to confess and repent and be saved. Every opportunity. Remember, we talked about this, when this stuff started happening, the first years of the tribulation, the things that were going on, what did the people say on earth? What did they say? Oh no, the great and terrible day of the Lord, we need to run and hide, God's judgment is falling on us. They knew God's judgment was coming. Their hearts were not softened. As a matter of fact, their hearts were hardened. The longer the tribulation period goes, the harder the heart of the people. I don't know what the age of accountability is during that time. That's a question that I don't have an answer for.
Like, no, I mean, I'm sure there
My-
were
my-
children that got drowned.
Yeah, my guess is if you have your kid, now, I don't know about a baby, let's say it's a toddler, and you're gonna take the mark of the beast, because you wanna eat, because you wanna work, and you wanna live, you're probably gonna drag your kid with you.
Right.
And say, hey, yeah, go ahead and take it. And they're probably telling them, if you don't get your kid deal, we're not feeding your kid. I don't know, that's just, it's all speculation as far as that goes.
Well, you know, and God knew us from before birth. Nothing
Right.
says that he has to know anybody at that 1,000-year time on. They could all be gone, it's just, there's no more.
Yeah. And the best question to ask ourselves, and I don't know that there's an answer, is what happens to those people? Do they have an opportunity to be saved? And I don't have that answer.
And we want them to.
Yeah, we do.
No,
We
they
do.
already have a
We
chance,
have them.
right?
Well, but those that are born,
Right.
1,000 years is a long time. Everybody's not living
This is
1,000
off
years.
the subject, but I just,
Okay.
kinda off what we're studying tonight, but can children be possessed?
Yeah, there was, the little
There was
girl
a Bible?
that was, yeah, absolutely.
Do you know where that was?
I'd have to look. I don't know if it's in Matthew, Mark, or Luke, but one of those, I think. I'll have to find it.
I was.
Well, there was
asked
the
a
woman
question.
wasn't the woman who asked for the dog scraps?
No, she wasn't.
Oh, she was
possessed.
sick, she was sick.
I'm talking about child.
Yeah,
child.
yeah.
Cause I have somebody that thinks their grandson is, and she asked me, and I said, oh my, I said I thought there was a incident of that in the Bible, but I didn't know where.
I think there's a definite difference between possession and a reprobate mind. Because God will turn people over to a reprobate
This is
mind,
a
and they
little
do everything in their own eyes
This
that's
is a little
okay.
kid. Like 8.
That's above my pay grade, I don't know. Is it possible?
Well, she thinks
Probably.
it is. She asked me if I'd heard that, and I said, I thought there was an incident in the Bible somewhere, but I didn't know where.
Probably.
There was in Mark 9:17-29, describes Jesus is surrounded by a crowd, one of whom asked for help for his son who is possessed. And I know there was a little.
Mark
boy-
where?
What'd you say, 20?
9:17-29.
17 to 20.
Okay,
Okay, back to it.
sorry.
Talk to
Yeah,
you more
thanks,
later.
thanks for that side rotation. All right, so Satan is released, so he's bound, and what God binds, nobody's gonna change that, all right? So remember, he sent one, that single solitary angel, snatched him up, put him in prison for 1,000 years, now he's released, what does he do? He hasn't learned his lesson, has he? He is still rebellious, hard-hearted, and bent on taking as many people down with him, and will come out to deceive the nations which are in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together for the war. So here we go again. They didn't learn the lesson the first time, 1,000 years ago. That's a long time though. I mean, look at our example. Do we learn from history anything? Very, very seldom. Man is doomed to repeat his idiocy when he doesn't live for the Lord. So he's gonna, now, who's this Gog and Magog? And don't, you get hung up on that because I can't, I did. I got hung up on that.
Ancient enemies.
Gog seems to be a general title for an enemy of God's people, and that the use of the name in verse 8 describes the human leader of Satan's forces. Okay, so it's kind of euphemism, if you will, and you can find out about Gog and Magog when they're talking about that in the Old Testament. If you turn back to Ezekiel 38. Ezekiel 38. Am I not talking loud enough?
Yeah, I just, every now and then I don't catch a word.
Well, just slap the table or something, or hit me with your cane.
Hit him hard.
Oh, you've been hurt enough.
Thank you.
Oh, you're too kind, Carol. Don't give him mercy.
She is so sweet. Thank you, Carol. You're nice, she's not.
And what was the number again?
Ezekiel 39.
38 and 39.
38 and 39, I'm sorry. 30, let's turn to 38. Ezekiel 38.
Did you find it?
No, I'm in Ezekiel, how, wait, yeah, I'll find it.
Okay.
I got 41.
She's close.
Yeah, I'm close. 38.
Okay. Verse 1. And the word of the Lord came to me saying, Son of man. Now, who is that, Son of man? Anybody?
Jesus.
There you go. Set your face towards Gog of the land of Magog, and the prince of Rosh, Meshesh, and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I am against you, O Gog, prince of Rosh, Meshesh, and Tubal. I will turn you about and put hooks into your jaws, and I will bring you out and all your army, horses and horsemen, all of them splendidly attired, a great company with buckler and shield, all of them wielding swords. Persia, Ethiopia, and Put, with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Gomer with all its troops, Beth-Garma from the remote parts of the north with all its troops, many peoples with you. And it goes on and on and on, and 39 as well. I'm not going to read all that. So there's kind of a dual prophecy there, but when it's talking, obviously when it talks about the Son of Man, it's referring to Jesus, and when Ezekiel was written, Jesus was not on the scene. Some have gone so far as to say one of those lands is equivalent of Russia, that there will be a great army come down out of Russia. Russia and China will gather together to, and what, remember I talked about deceiver of nations. What does deceive man? What's man's great deceiver? Talk about this. Nobody remembers. Everybody's looking at me like you're crazy. Your heart.
I
Oh,
guess.
Your heart.
oh, okay.
Man's heart is wicked. Okay. Satan deceives the nations. Man's heart deceives himself. Can Satan deceive us? Yeah, he can, if he chose to, but he doesn't need to. So many times our own heart deceives us.
Well, then why do we ask for God to soften people's hearts so that they receive it?
Because we know that their heart is inherently wicked. And he needs to speak into their heart to counteract that wickedness that's in our heart.
And so we don't develop the hardened heart.
Yeah, and we don't develop a hard heart. Satan,
Seared
and,
heart.
you know, the Bible's very clear in Ephesians that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual principalities and powers and authority. Spiritual things. So there's a great spiritual thing that goes on that we cannot see, that Satan has. Remember when they opened the abyss and all those demons came out? They were put in there at that time, but Satan's got all kinds of demons. A third of the host of heaven came out with Satan. They're roaming around out there doing their thing. Satan is not omniscient or omnipresent. He is singular. He is not like God. He can't be everywhere at once. But he has his minions, and they go about doing their thing because he's the prince of the power of this air, of this earth. He is prince. But we see here, once he's released, what does he do? He goes about deceiving people. They've had 1,000 years of peace under the guidance and authority of Christ and his saints. Now, I dare say, if the saints are ruling with Christ, there's not going to be any hard-handed ruling, no dictatorships, if you will. You know, there's going to be fairness. There's going to be, I would guess, mercy and grace. I mean, after all, we're the saints of God. We're like Christ. We're in Christ. He's in us more than ever. So, Satan's released. What does he do? He deceives the nations right off the bat. And what do? It says, we're going to destroy God once and for all. We're going to get together. And so they march on this, the camp of the saints and the beloved city in verse 9. Where is that?
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem. So they gather up there. They march on Jerusalem, and guess what happens? Fire came down from heaven and devoured them. It's all over. So you guys don't ever learn your lesson, do you? He speaks it, and it happens. That quick.
Did you say Gog and Magog could be China and Russia?
No, not exactly Gog and Magog. It's a terminology they use for people that are against God, basically. It doesn't really represent anybody. One of the things that, as I was reading, Magog, some believe, are the descendants of Noah's grandson of Genesis 10:2. Later they became known as the Scythians and were generally located north of the Black Sea and Caspian Seas. Well, does anybody know where the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea is?
Russia.
Russia. Okay. Others identify them with the people who live farther south in Asia Minor. Gog seems to be a general title for an enemy of God's people. I told you that. Okay. So he deceives the nations. They decide, okay, we're gonna end this God thing right now. We're gonna go to war with him. They go down to this plain about the same place they got destroyed the first time, and they're gonna have a final battle. And yes, it was final. And God devoured millions upon millions. People are devoured. It says the number of them is like the sand of the seashore. That's a lot. Now, is that all the the earth's inhabitants at that time? I don't know. That's one of them great mystery questions that we have that we'll just, when we stand before God or when we're in eternity, not probably when we first stand before Him, but later on, when we get a little more accustomed to our, our new clothing, if you will, maybe we'll ask that question.
Well, I read just a little bit farther in Ezekiel when we were there, and it said it took them 7 months to clean up all the bodies.
7 months.
And they had people that they sent out as bone searchers, and when they'd see a bone, they'd make a marker, and the barriers would come get them, so there's apparently people left.
Now, that was probably the first battle of Armageddon, before the 1,000 years. Not at this, because what we see here,
This is it. This one has got to be it, because after this, the 1,000 years over.
yeah.
Right.
This is at the end of the 1,000 years. What happens next is the great white throne judgment, and then heaven and earth are consumed. There is no more heaven and no more earth.
It kind of means to me that all these people that were killed at this last battle, there was none of them saved that was here had peace all this time.
That's a pretty good indicator.
Yeah.
Without saying it point blank,
Yeah,
we
it's
kind of have to read between the lines a little bit.
Yeah.
That nobody really got saved during that
Nobody
period
got
of time.
saved.
And this is just a side note, I mean, cause it's not in here at all. If we're reigning with Christ, we're observing all of this? I mean, this big battle? I know,
Well,
nobody knows,
I
cause it
don't
doesn't
know.
say, but it's like,
That's
okay,
a
we
good
were
question.
there, now where, I mean, cause I'm not selfishly thinking about myself, but where am
Well,
I in all
keep
this?
in mind, the second death cannot touch us.
Yeah, that's true,
You will not die.
yeah.
If you're a saint of Christ, you're not gonna have to go through this judgment, you're not gonna go through the great white throne judgment, you're not gonna visit the second death, there's not another death coming for you, there's not any other harm that can be done to you at that point, whether you're here watching it or not, it's not gonna matter. And I think they're consumed by fire, you can kind of imagine that, God's able to direct that wherever He wants. And I kind of agree with Charles. It seems like everybody that's left at this time is not, they've been deceived by Satan, and they've decided to come and fight against God, and that's their country.
It didn't take him long. They lived 1,000 years in peace, and he's out just a little while.
Yeah. As soon as he's loose, he starts his work. He didn't learn anything. He was down there festering for 1,000 years. That's a pretty long fester. But
Yeah, and as soon as he came back, they went right to him. They followed him.
see, so their hearts really weren't softened.
Hmm.
There was peace because God ruled. Christ ruled. And He probably had made it so, there wasn't gonna be any shenanigans, would be my guess. They're gonna be cast in the lake of the fire along with the Antichrist and false prophet forever. Matthew 25:46 and 2 Thessalonians 1:9 tell us that. So, there you have it.
It almost makes you wonder the purpose of the 1,000-year reign. I mean, Christ comes back,
I
and
know.
here He is, and here we're all, those of us are reigning, and it's peace, but then we're just gonna have the big kaboom again, and it's like, I mean, there's a reason,
Yeah.
or it wouldn't be there. And
Right.
God's got something there He wants us to get out of that.
It's
just not
a
quite there.
mystery. It's a mystery we cannot completely understand.
What was your Matthew 25 what?
25,
46.
yeah. 25:46 and 2 Thessalonians 1:9 was the other. You wanna read it for us?
What?
Ben? You can read.
I don't want to read. Matthew 46?
Oh, no,
25,
Matthew 25.
Yeah, 46.
Yeah.
25, 46.
Yeah,
Okay.
see what it says.
And these will go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into eternal life.
Okay, now look at 2 Thessalonians 1:9, what does it say? 1:9.
Knowing this, that the law is not made for a righteous person, but for the lawless and the for the murderers and the fathers, the murderers of mothers, for manslayers, for, how long far do you want me to go?
That's good.
I don't think that's what you wanted me to read.
Were you at Second Thessalonians? Were you in First Thessalonians?
Second Thessalonians, what did you say?
That might make a difference.
One
I was in
nine.
Timothy, what?
One nine.
That might be a little bit.
1:9.
We're
Yes.
well past the law now.
The coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan with all power, signs, and lying wonders.
There you go. Signs, powers, and lying wonders. So he deceives the nations again. So he's a great deceptor. Is it any wonder what our world is turning into? Satan is at work. And it's only gonna get worse. It's only gonna get worse. We should expect it to get worse and not be surprised about it getting worse. Again, you know, if you do your own study, you're gonna find some different interpretations of what we talked about, these very things, because they're open for interpretation. We like to put our spin on it, meaning, we like to think that, well, if the baby's born, surely God wouldn't.
But he has before, and we know that, so, just like she was saying during the flood,
Yes, before those 40 years in the wilderness where the Jews were wandering in the wilderness, do you think there were any babies being born?
What?
yes,
The 40 years in the wilderness, were there babies being born?
Sure, yes.
What happened to them?
Well, the babies, in the 40 years in the wilderness, when their parents died, they got to go into the promised land.
There was only 3 people who went into the promised land.
Joshua, Caleb, and,
I forget the other one's name, who's the third one?
well, but
The rest of them did not go into the promised land. Now, I don't know if they all died. That generation of rebellious people died. Whether that meant everybody, all of them, and how many people was it, all of them? Oh, some people say as many as 1 to 3 men.
oh, really? Wow.
And there, you know, there were babies being born, right? Life goes on. And so where did they all go? Now, maybe the older generation that was disobedient, they died off, but 40 years, so if you had a baby when you come out of Egypt, the first year, they were 40 years old by the time they got to where they were going into the promised land. They didn't go. So either they're still wandering around the desert over there, or they went to another country, or they died. They did not inherit the promise of God.
It says
That's
that
the point.
Joshua and Caleb were the only adult
Was it 2?
Israelites.
Why did I think it was 3?
It says they were the only ones.
Joshua and Caleb, I thought there was 3. My bad. 2. 2. Okay.
So you don't know where they went in the promised land?
Were they
You said,
Joshua and
when
Caleb?
the baby, no, you said when the babies were born and then of course they become adults,